It's part of the process here. So what we have over in this corner of the Western Gallery is a large painting by Daniel Sprick. Dan Sprick is a Western contemporary realist painter that does incredibly large works, incredibly complex, incredibly detailed, full of metaphor or simile. And it's interesting because they're so rich with detail that at some point early on we came up with a brief of kind of having a sense of being inside the artist's mind. And so we wanted to create a focus area for Dan Sprick. And the result of that effort is this room. What we have is as with every room in this building, is an oddly shaped space. On one wall over here, we have a narrative with Dan Sprick that we shot at a studio in Glenwood Springs. And we go back and forth between talking with him and getting some detail of his philosophies, what he's thinking, why he thinks it, interspersed with a number of images that he shot during the creation of that work. So it gives some sense of the buildup of the piece. And then what happens over here on this triangular wall is that his narrative is spilling out across the wall, and as he says particular key phrases, they coalesce out of this flow of words. And you can see it happen right here.
If I was only doing it for myself, I wouldn't show it to anyone.
And so we try and draw attention to particularly salient points during the narrative that he's talking about. The thing that's interesting about this is it's all dynamically generated. It's not a film loop. That's a film loop. This is new and different every time. These are synchronized in a way with some time stamping and XML files with an OpenGL environment that we developed or worked with some friends to develop. And the idea here is to draw yourself from this narrative along one wall, pull yourself across to this wall, which has a series of cutouts in it, and you can see behind these cutouts are individual objects from the painting that we saw back out before this room. And so, we go to any one of these individual screens here. I'll probably choose one that's not going to work, but we'll try it out. Is you can come up with a little bit of additional detail, an additional quote of information about the different objects in the painting. And so it kind of is the full tilt of starting off with the artist's individual thoughts, his words as they cascade across the room, and then narrowing on individual elements within the painting, an individual or a simple interface that's relatively easy to use. And have these screens just kind of float as part of what this experience is as a whole. And then proceeding to this final wall over here, where as you kind of sit back, as you begin to think about exiting, you're greeted with a self-portrait of Dan Sprick, and yet another screen that gives a little bit more information, this time actually just kind of floating in space instead. The thing that was interesting about this was everything in the space, to the projectors, to the individual screens, was incredibly complex to deal with. This is a good example here. This entire building has unusual spaces, unusual walls, and so, early on we made this design decision saying that, where we're projecting, sure, I could correct for distortion, but at some time we just decided to embrace the spaces itself and say, make them their own unique objects on there as well. But even better, we did some incredibly hard stuff, like this triangular space, we matched an OpenGL window to that space perfectly. In the process, we learned that walls like this one are not perfectly straight, so we have to draw additional control points in there and make it somehow look like it's floating through the whole thing. All of these monitors that are here are beyond the normal limits for VGA and USB. And so there's a complex additional wiring scheme of network infrastructure that converts VGA to network signal, that pulls it a few hundred feet away and back through the space. Coming up with a projector system that's adaptable to the museum, in this case, an Arakawa-based railing system that pops into our lighting grid. That gives us a lot of control over where to position things, how to make things flexible. And then also make it relatively clean, that the projectors are almost floating in space and simply provide the experience. So at some point, it's not about the technology that's here, but rather you kind of have a cohesive experience. There's a lot of different elements that work together, kind of rich. And while each individual thing alone can be relatively complex, when all together kind of get this sense of being inside Dan Sprick's mind and giving you a little closer glimpse into his life and personality. So we'll move on.